Hey guys, welcome back to Do You Even Food. On today's episode we're going to be making... It's not going to work, is it? Okay, energy. Focus at the camera, okay. What's up guys, welcome back to Do You Even Food. On today's episode we're going to be making red velvet cake. So what is red velvet cake? All it is a blasphemous chocolate cake. It's just cocoa powder and red food coloring. That's it. People always asking me, how do you make a red velvet cake so moist? That's right, I said it. Moist. For me, the trick is oil and buttermilk. I only really use thin layers of cake and I use baking soda as my rising agent. Those layers of cake and cream filling give you an unreal texture. So let's go through the ingredients we're going to need to make our red velvet cake. You want to cream your butter with fine white sugar. We're going to need eggs and buttermilk, vegetable oil and apple cider vinegar. For our dry ingredients, we're going to use white flour, a pinch of salt, cocoa powder and baking soda. Finally, red food coloring. If you check on the bottle, they might tell you what the end color will be, and we're looking for a nice dark beetroot color. The equipment you're going to need is a large mixing bowl, some small measuring bowls, a couple of spatulas. I'm going to use a piping bag to pipe my mix onto my baking tray, but it's not a problem if you don't have one. You can just use a spatula to spread out your mix nice and evenly. You want a nice sized baking tray that fits most regular ovens and line it with some baking paper. And finally, the most important piece of equipment, a 1995 Kenwood HM300 mixer. Trust me, this bad boy has seen some cakes. Right, first thing we're going to do is we're going to put our oven on fan setting at 180 degrees. We've got our mixing bowl with our sugar already weighed out in it. My butter has been sitting out for an hour or so and it's nice and soft. I'm just going to break up the butter into smaller pieces. Once it's broken down a little bit, we just want to cream those two together. Once it's nicely combined, we're going to slowly add our egg. You want to go a little bit at a time. It's going to look like it's curdling, but don't worry, we're going to add the flour later and that will bring the mix back together. Right, now we've added our sugar, our butter and our eggs. We're going to add the rest of our wet ingredients till it's almost like a thick batter. First goes in a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. Mix that in. Next I'm going to add my buttermilk slowly. Like I said, it looks like it's curdled. Now I've added the buttermilk, but don't worry, it's going to all come together once we've added the flour. I'm going to add half of the oil now. And now it's time to add the dry ingredients. I've already whisked together our flour, our cocoa powder and our salt. And I've added right at the end our baking soda. Now we're going to add it little by little to our mix. I've held back a little bit of my dry mix so I can add it at the end once I've added the rest of the oil. Now all the oil is in there, I'm going to add the last of the dry mix. And then we can add the food coloring.
The ice cream man is coming!
Now the reason why I'm adding my food coloring last is because you never quite know the strength of your cocoa powder and you never know quite the strength of your food coloring. If you add it too early, you could add too much and then you would end up with almost like a pink cake, because your chocolate is not dark enough to stabilize the color. If you add too little, your cocoa powder can overpower your food coloring and you're left with a beige, brown, dirty looking cake. And trust me, you really don't want that. I'm gonna add my food coloring little by little and then we'll see where we end up. Right, the color we have here is not too bad, but don't be fooled by the camera. It's still a little bit dark. So I'm gonna add a touch more so that we get that nice bright color when we bake it off in the oven. So our oven is nice and hot, our cake batter is ready in our bag. We just need to snip the end of the bags so we can pipe in the mix nice and evenly. Now the batter's in the tray, we can just bake it off.
A few minutes later.
So the cake has just come out of the oven. How long did it take to cook? I have no idea. In between 12 and 20 minutes. You need to take yourself a skewer and every 8 minutes or so, poke the corners and poke in the center. As soon as that skewer starts coming out clean, you know it's cooked. Because it all depends on the size of your tin, how much batter you put inside, and also the strength of your oven. Sometimes you just gotta go with the flow and feel it out, because baking is not an exact science. You gotta trust your instincts and just learn to feel around your work. The cake is now cooling down, and actually what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna freeze it overnight. The reason why I do that is because when I come to cut it, I want it to be super clean, and I wanna be able to pick up each piece and layer them without any issues. So we're gonna come back tomorrow, we're gonna trim off the edges, we're going to trim off the top, make our cream filling, layer this all up to make our beautiful red velvet cake. It's tomorrow and our cake is frozen nicely. We're going to trim it down, portion it up and stick it back in the freezer whilst we make our cream filling. The purpose of that is so we have nice clean edges whilst we layer it up. I would use a serrated pastry knife to trim it down if you have one. You can also use a bread knife, but do be gentle because they can be a lot less forgiving. I've also got myself a ruler and an extra piece of baking paper. That's just going to help things stay nice and clean as we separate out the different parts of the cake. I'm going to place my baking paper on my frozen cake and then we can turn it out. For now you can leave the paper on the bottom of the cake because it helps with cleanliness in your layers as we're going to stack it up. Now that it's turned out, we can flip it back over one more time. As you can see, flipping that cake when it wasn't frozen would have been much harder, and there would have been a possibility that it would crack down the middle. Always remember that these things defrost really quickly, so if you don't feel comfortable, you can stick it back in the freezer till it's a bit more firm. At this point, I'm going to trim the edges width-wise so we can portion our cake out into 3 equal pieces to create our layers. I'm going to measure my cake lengthwise, and I have just a bit more than 30 centimeters. So I'm going to start from one side and make marks at every 10 centimeter interval. And I'm going to do the same thing at the top, starting from the same side. Feel free to turn your board around whichever way you feel more comfortable. And using my ruler as a guide, I'm going to trim off my edges. Don't worry if the corner breaks a little bit. We're going to trim this up perfectly a little bit later. Make sure to drag your knife through the bottom to cut the paper with the cake so you can transfer that individually onto another tray. As you can see, I now have 3 equal in width pieces of cake. I'm going to choose just one of them to create my baseline depth and length, and in the meantime, the other 2 can go right back into the tray. As you can see during baking, it doesn't always come out perfectly flat. So that's why we're not worried about the top being a bit burnt, because we're going to trim it off to make it as even as we can. You're going to take your knife and start on the thinnest end and move the opposite direction. Make sure you slice gently whilst having one hand flat on the top of your cake. The reason why I didn't already trim the ends off is so that once I reach the end with the knife, sometimes a little piece can break off, like in the corner here. What I want to do is give myself as much space as I can to create a nice clean cut to get those perfect layers. Now I'm going to trim the other 2. I'm going to put them back in the freezer to set. For cream fillings, there are so many different types you could go for. You could go for a buttercream, you could go for a cream cheese base. Today, we're going to be doing part cream cheese and part Swiss meringue. I've got 750 grams of regular cream cheese in one of my bowls. In our other bowl, we're going to be making a Swiss meringue. So a Swiss meringue is a cooked out meringue that we're going to be whipping up and then folding through our cream cheese base. The equipment we're going to be using are these 2 bowls, a spatula, a small pan that we can then heat up our meringue base, a bowl for our sugar, and our trusty 1995 Kenwood mixer. I'm going to start off by lightly mixing together my cream cheese just to make it softer so we can then fold through our meringue. You're also going to need a thermometer so that you can check the temperature of your meringue. So we have 250 grams of egg whites and 350 grams of white sugar. We're going to combine these two together and heat them on the stove using a small spatula so that it doesn't catch on the bottom. What we're looking to do here is we're looking to melt down our sugar and bring our egg whites to a roughly 60 degrees. We're now going to quickly add our egg to our bowl and we're going to start whisking straight away. You want to make sure that you keep on whisking on full power until your bowl is cool to the touch. Now that our meringue has been whipped up, the bowl is cool to the touch. You can see that the meringue is not falling out of the bowl. Like in our chocolate mousse recipe, we're going to fold these two together in 3 parts. If you haven't seen it already, go and check it out in the channel.
Do it. Seriously, do it. Do it.
We're going to add a bit of our meringue in first. We're just going to fold that through. Going to add a bit more of our meringue. Just to be safe, I'm going to add it in 4 parts instead of 3. So there we have a beautiful frosting. It's light, it's creamy, but it's not too sweet and it will hold beautifully inside your cake. Let's go grab those 3/3 of cake that we've left in the freezer and let's build this thing. As you can see, I was able to trim off that little edge that broke earlier so we can make it nice and square. Now I measure up the next 2. I'd suggest that you build your cake on the plate or board that you're intending on serving it on. And that is so you don't have to move it from one plate to another and risk it falling or breaking. I'm going to serve mine on this chopping board that I have here. Take the first layer and remove the paper on the bottom. Now that we have our base layer, we can start building. I've put my cream into piping bags so I can add an even layer and then sit the next piece of cake on top. Then we add our next layer, give it a light press, more cream. Now the last layer of cake. Remove the paper, make sure it's seated nicely in the middle, and with just a small spatula or a knife, I just want to clean up the edges. If you find any gaps in the corners, just touch them up with a bit of cream. Now that the sides of our cake are all nice and clean, I'm going to take the rest of the cream that I have in my piping bags and I'm going to decorate it really nicely. I finished decorating it. It doesn't quite look the way I wanted to because it's super hot under these lights, and honestly for pastry, that's the worst condition. At this point, I would suggest putting it in the fridge for half an hour to an hour so the cream can really set, so when you slice it, it doesn't all just fall apart. I'm also going to add just a little bit of cocoa powder just to give it a little bit more dimension. Right, let's slice this thing open and see how it looks. There we are guys, red velvet cake. It might not look perfect, but trust me, it tastes amazing. Go out there, make your own, send us some pictures, or don't, whatever, but be sure to see us next time on Do You Even Food.